Okay, now I want to make this big jump, which is to the question of how do you think?
Me?
At all. How is thinking done?
By a little brain in your head.
Maybe the part that does it, but that isn't how.
If you happen to be wearing a white lab coat or have an office with a nice couch, we could have a very long talk about how my father, scientist, anthropologist, psychologist, cyberneticist, has affected my approach to life. But that may or may not be interesting. So I'd like to look at the question from another angle. I have his forehead and his long legs, and in keeping with the genetic similarities I inherited from him, I'm inviting you to do the thing he did best, which is to look at the thing, be it an earthworm, a number sequence, a tree, a formal definition of addiction, anything at all, from another angle. The thing was never the thing. The map was not the territory. And whatever it was could be turned slightly and re-examined, seemingly infinitely. Like a Rubik's Cube, only one in which there might be several right answers and patterns. He would twist one bit and re-evaluate the rules from there, and then twist it again to be sure he didn't get stuck down a singular line of thinking. This is a film about how Gregory Bateson thought. He was always learning from everyone and everything around him. From the dog, from the fish tank, from the scientists who came to visit, from poetry, from artwork, from me. And as a child, I learned from him that learning never stops.
It is more than fashionable. It is inculcated by our great universities, who believe there is such a thing as psychology, which is different from sociology, and such a thing as anthropology, which is different from both, and such a thing as aesthetics or art criticism, which is different from both, all three, all four, whatever, and that the world is made of separable items of knowledge in which, if you were a student, you could be examined by a series of disconnected questions called true or false quizzes, quiz bits, as you might say. And the first point I want to get over to you is that the world is not like that at all, or let us be more polite. The world in which I live is not like that at all. And as to you, it's your business to live in whatever world you want to.
Gregory Bateson challenged us to rethink or to stand back and try to perceive in a different way, to see how reality is actually operating. How does biology work? How do we work? How does even our own thinking get determined by larger ideas?
When finally one of his ideas went ka-thunk and fell into place, and the waves, like the whale flapping its tail, were enormous and just echoed out into all these different disciplines. So his inspirational quality was really quite extraordinary.
That he worked in so many disciplines is a consequence of his way of thinking. He was not interested in specializing in a narrow field. He was interested in larger patterns. He was interested in how things are connected, and especially how living things are connected.
From biology at the beginning, into anthropology, into systems of ideas, pathologies of systems of ideas, and then to systems of ideas which are how we all try to live together. And we all includes the animals and the plants as well as you and me.
Looking at just how reality unfolds and how it all works. And when you take a little piece of it, then you just look at that little piece and you come up with a lot of erroneous interpretations of what's going on.
I've always thought that way.
Yeah.
That the relation between me and that book, or the book on the table, is still a microcosm of the relation between man and God, or God and the devil, or what have you. That the big relations and the small relations are all the same thing. For study purposes, you have to work with small ones sometimes. And then people blame you for working with small ones. Then you start working with big ones, and they blame you for being a mystic.
No, but what
But it's all the same business.
It was as though he could zoom in on the very intimate and personal dynamics of a single conversation and zoom out and be able to hold in focus a much larger context. As a child, I used to sit on the floor next to him, drawing pictures and listening while he gave lectures. Even then, it seemed to me that he was peering through a trap door at the inner workings of life. Krishnamurti said something like, "You might think you're thinking your own thoughts. You're not. You're thinking your culture's thoughts." And Gregory said, "The major problems in the world are the result of the difference between how nature works and the way people think." What does it even mean to change the way we think?
I guess I've been reading too much Alice. You remember when they come out from swimming in Alice's tears, she and all the animals? She tries to dry them by reading them history, which she thinks is the driest material she can produce. And she reaches the sentence, "The Archbishop found it advisable." The duck said, "Found what advisable?" "It," said Alice. "It, to me," said the duck, "is usually a frog or a worm."
Gregory observed, as all of us have by now, that human beings frequently behave in ways that are destructive of natural ecological systems. And he asked the question, what is there about our way of perceiving that makes us not see the delicate interdependencies in an ecological system that give it its integrity? We don't see them, and therefore we break them.
The story basically was in the late 19th century. Some busy entomologist, as Gregory said, was up looking around in the very high beams over the High Hall at New College, Oxford, and noticed that something needed to be done. And then it was a big question of where would you find oak timbers 40 feet long and 2 feet by 2 feet anywhere in modern England. And then it turned out that at some place in the college lands there were some very large oak trees that it was reported. There was a forester who came and said, "We was wondering what you'd be asking. We've been keeping those trees for the oak beams of New College, Oxford, because beams do wear out after a few hundred years, and we wanted to have some new ones on hand." And Gregory said, "That's the way to run a culture."
What is important is how he approached everything. How does it work? What works with it? What are its relationships? How does it interact? How does it learn? And of course, how does it think? Poring through his work, I find that I'm continually reminded at each step that an ecology of mind is a slippery and rigorous friend. Without context, words and actions have no meaning at all. This is true of all communication, that which tells the sea anemone how to grow and the amoeba what he should do next.
You have probably been taught that you have 5 fingers. That is, on the whole, incorrect. That is the way language subdivides things into things. Probably the biological truth is that in the growth of this thing in your embryology, which you scarcely remember, what was important was not 5, but 4 relations between pairs of fingers.
We're always in relation to something, and that being in relation was a real critical aspect of Gregory's thought. Well, one of my favorite examples is actually to pick a molecule in the body, because it's very simple. It's not a complicated thing like a thought. Something like the blood molecule hemoglobin. We could know everything about the atoms that make up hemoglobin, even where they came from in the formation of the universe. We could know the structure of it. We could know its interaction with all kinds of other substances in the world. To know everything we could about the physics and chemistry and history of the hemoglobin in terms of where the atoms and molecules came from, we would still not know the essential thing. We would not know that it's in relationship to oxygen and in relationship to the way oxygen helps bodies process energy. It's in that kind of funny sense about oxygen and about life and about metabolism, getting energy. What's surprising about it is that probably we could go to another planet in the galaxy somewhere where we found life like animal life that used oxygen because it's such a wonderful source of energy. It's such a powerfully bonding atom. And they would probably have something like hemoglobin flowing through their veins. But it would be nothing like hemoglobin in any of its details. Probably not even a protein that we would recognize. But it would do the same thing. The function of hemoglobin is what we're talking about when we say that. And the function of hemoglobin is not what it is, but it's what it's in relationship to.
We live in a world that's only made of relationships. When you think you can talk about the table, you say it's hard. All you are saying is that in a conflict, a confrontation between table and your hand had to stop moving at a certain point. The table won. If the table was soft, your hand would have won. But you're talking about something between the two of them.
I once spent hundreds of hours looking at a film of a family therapy session. And there was a mother and a father and the child who was the identified patient and a psychotherapist. And that child was bizarre behavior, disruptive, and I thought, oh, that child is making his parents miserable. What an awful thing. And then after I'd watched it another 100 times, I thought, you know, it's that mother that's making the child behave that way. Another 100 times.